Hello, everyone. Welcome. So, I was trying to maybe wait a little bit, but I think we can actually get started. So, I think we're about two or three persons here. Eventually, every other person can follow later because after streaming, the video will also remain recorded for future purpose. All right, so in today's lesson, I want us to discuss about photography. Of course, this is Blast internship, photography internship, and in the last class, we actually talked a little bit about introduction to blast photography, and then we did a little discussion on the different softwares and the materials that you would require. So, moving on to the main course of the program is the introduction to photography. So let's start with what is photography. Now, we may not have enough time to go over all five outlines, which is number one, what is photography? And then history of photography, the different types of cameras, some key concepts in cameras, and then the basic controls of a camera. But let us see how far we can get to today. So, what is photography? Okay, give me a second. All right, sorry about that. This slide actually comes out. Okay, let's resume. Okay, I think what's happening, I have two slides open, so they are kind of conflicting. I'm going to have to close one. Much better. Sorry about that. So, what is photography? Photography is the art of taking pictures. So, it's the art or process of taking pictures using a camera. So, we are going to be talking about exactly what came about that people started having interest in photography, and also hopefully this will also build your interest in photography so that you also develop a passion for it if you don't have that passion already. Now, if you are very interested in photography, you might want to learn how to develop your own film. Now, developing your own film is actually an old way of doing photography, but developing your own film in a dark room, that used to be how photography was done. And of course, you should also practice yelling, say cheese, just to get your subject to smile. Now, since photography was invented in the 19th century, The art of capturing images using light has expanded far beyond what the original photographers could have imagined. Now today many of us, we practice photography using our phones and we actually do not think twice about it. You just pull up your smartphone and take a picture. But today we are going to actually see the work behind photography and how difficult it was in early days and in the early 19th century to actually take pictures. All right. Now the word photography is actually a combination of two Greek words, which is photo and graphy. Basically, the photo part means light. Okay, so the Greek root for photo is light, while the Greek root word for graphy is drawing. So photography simply means drawing with light. So we are going to see how light actually translates to creating images and photographs. Now, history of photography. This slide is actually showing us the different kind of photographs and different kind of cameras in history. The first one being the camera obscura, invented in 1021. But I'm just going to show you a video briefly that will explain this better. Let's take a look at this video.
This is a quick look at how photography has developed. Photography is hinged on the discovery that if you poke a hole in the wall of a dark room, you create camera obscura. Light passing through the hole is projected upside down and retains color and perspective. The first historical mentions of camera obscura in pinhole photography are by ancient philosophers Mausi, Aristotle, and Alhazen. In 1490, Leonardo da Vinci records detailed descriptions of camera obscura and uses it to trace stuff. By the 1700s, camera obscura devices are common, and there's evidence to suggest artists like Rembrandt, Vermeer, and Caravaggio used them. Sketchy. In 1724, Johann Heinrich Schulze discovers that substances mixed with silver nitrate react to light. Sadly, the images fade soon after. Until one day in 1826, the world's first photograph is taken by Joseph Nicephore Niepce in France using a procedure called heliography. Voila! This exposure takes several days, and you can see the sun lights up both sides of the building. After his death, Niepce's partner Louis Daguerre continues his work and creates the first practical photographic process in 1833, the daguerreotype. In 1839, the French government buys and declares the daguerreotype free to the world. This is when cool stuff starts happening. Like the first photo of a human. Although this exposure lasted around 7 minutes, a man was getting his shoes polished and was standing perfectly still, thus making history. This was also the first photo with soul. And of course, the world's first selfie is taken by a guy named Robert Cornelius. And human's gonna human. It wouldn't take long for nude photography to kick off too. In 1840, Henry Fox Talbot unveils the calotype, a process based on negatives that allows for paper copies to be made. However, Talbot tried to charge license fees for the calotype, so it didn't really catch on. Compared to Daguerre, whose name is now one of 72 names inscribed on the Eiffel Tower, Talbot spent his life fighting lawsuits and eventually gave up on photography. You could say Talbot became a bit negative in the end. It's also important to mention the contribution of Sir John Herschel, who published many essential research papers and coined the term photography, from the Greek words of light and drawing. By the 1850s, mobile photo studios were all the rage because photos had to be developed on site. Exposure times were about 3 minutes long, so people used neck braces and drugs to keep still. It's also why nobody smiled in early photos. What could be the world's first Photoshop occurs in 1861. The head of Abraham Lincoln is placed on a more noble body. The world's first color photograph is also produced. It's of a bow. In 1871, Richard Leach Maddox, who had an outstanding mustache, invents the gelatin dry plate. This means smaller cameras and no tripods necessary. Great success, old chap. Now, here's a cool story, bro. In order to settle the debate of whether all four of a horse's hooves ever simultaneously leave the ground, Englishman Edward Muybridge sets up 12 cameras with wire triggers in the path of a galloping horse. The world's first photo sequence proves that they do. In 1885, George Eastman, founder of Eastman Kodak, invents roll film. The first handheld camera, the Kodak, goes on sale in 1888. Why Kodak? Like the letter K. The Kodak came pictures that needed to be sent back to the factory for processing and reloading when the roll was finished. Eastman takes mass-market photography a step further in the early 1900s with the Brownie, an affordable box camera that introduces the concept of the snapshot. Lights employee Oscar Barnack builds the revolutionary 35mm Leica 1, which goes into print in 1925. The camera allows photographers to go mobile and capture the moment. Some of the most iconic images in history would later be taken on Leicas. The first single-lens reflex SLR camera around 9. And the first digital image is created from a scan in 1957. However, digital cameras would only arrive a little later, in 1975, when Steve Sasson, a young engineer working for Eastman Kodak, invents the first digital camera. But nobody at Kodak is interested in digital. Who wants to see their photos on a TV? Why change the profitable film photography formula? Too late. Kodak only later switches to digital in 2004 and files for bankruptcy in 2012. The digital revolution begins in the 90s. DSLRs, point and shoots. Photography had never been more accessible. Well, until the first mobile phone with a camera came out in 2000. Game changer. 15 years later, and modern smartphones now have insanely powerful cameras. In just seconds, we are able to capture every moment and share it online. Photography has become a global passion and has truly brought the world closer together.
All right, so that was a lot of information to take in, but it basically explains the history of photography, right, in one video. So, but I think I personally want to talk a little bit about the camera obscura, which is the very first, which is the very first one, right? So the camera obscura, basically the way it worked then was you the way light actually moves, right? The way light moves is light has a way of transferring images. So the early scientists actually discovered that if you take let's use this picture. All right, let's take a look at this particular page briefly. So early scientists actually discovered that if you take if you take a dark room or a box, that is dark, and allow light to go in through a pinhole of that box, okay, you are going to have an inverted image of the outside. So if you had a landscape scene out here, in here would be the same landscape scene but inverted. So using a different kind of lens can actually invert that image back to the original size. So this was actually how some artists used the phenomenon of camera obscura to trace an image. So when they try to maybe draw a portrait or draw a landscape, this would be their reference picture more or less. So it's really amazing to see how far it has come. So this actually explains the basics of how the camera works, right? We see a lens, which is just right now a hole, and you see an image. And if you understand a little bit about lighting in physics, you understand that images are produced when light actually hits an object. So imagine you were in a dark room. Imagine there was no light source. You cannot actually tell any information of any object in front of you or any image in front of you. But when light hits an object, and when you introduce light to the room or to the scene, you begin to see colors and pictures and images. So pictures and images are directly related to light, and also the different colors that are in white light, because your natural wavelength of light, right, which is the sunlight, it contains the different colors of light. So the colors you see are the reflected light coming back to your eyes. So you see the way you have a screen here, and the image is going through this tiny hole, and then it is inverted into the screen. So the entire history of photography was how to convert this image that was reflected into a permanent image. So how to convert this, because normally once this light goes off, this image disappears. So how to introduce a film or a screen that would allow you print out this image. That is what the history of photography, that is what the history of photography was all about. Okay. So this is another version of a dark room, but now this is like a life-size dark room, and now you can see an image outside in the real world projected through a tiny hole, and this tiny hole is what we call lens today. And in our case, it's not just a lens, it's not just a hole, but then it's a camera lens, like it's a glass. So the glass could be concave lens or convex lens, depending on what is being transmitted. So there is a lot to look at, because if you notice there is a mirror here, right? When we move on to talking about mirror and mirrorless camera, you observe that the mirror actually is positioned at an angle 45 degrees so that the image can be reflected to your screen or a viewfinder. So let us X out of this and move on to the next slide. Okay.
This is a quick look.
All right, we've seen this already. So camera obscura, as the name suggests, many historical camera obscura experiments were performed in dark rooms. The surroundings of the projected image have to be relatively dark for the image to be clear. Now, the human eye actually works a lot like camera obscura. Both have an opening. So the opening is called the pupil, a biconvex lens for reflecting the light, and a surface where the image is formed. And in the human eye, that surface is called the retina. Okay. Early camera obscura devices were large and often installed inside rooms or tents. Later, portable versions made from wooden boxes often had lens instead of a pinhole. So you see, they began to replace the pinhole of the camera obscura with an actual lens. All right. Some camera obscura boxes are also featured an angled mirror, so that will allow the image to be projected the right way upward. So that flips the inverted image and allows it to be projected upwards. All right, moving forward. Now that we have seen a little bit about the history of photography, let us now look at the different types of cameras. So this is basically where we are going to start from. And the very first one is the digital single lens reflex cameras, or in short, DSLR. So these are what we call professional cameras, and most photographers have a DSLR. Okay, if you're going to do photography as a business, you should at least get a DSLR. Now, an upgrade to DSLR is the mirrorless cameras. So mirrorless cameras are more recent than the DSLR, and we are going to see the difference very soon. Then we have the point and shoot cameras. Point and shoot cameras are simply they are almost like mirrorless cameras, but they do not have interchangeable lenses. So these are the cameras you used to buy maybe years ago that just had one lens. All you need to do is just snap the picture. You can print it out. You can save it as JPEG. You cannot change your lenses. Okay, so these are compact cameras, easy to use. They have a lot of automatic features. You really do not have option of manual focus in those cameras. It's all fully auto. Then we have action cameras. Action cameras are used in wildlife photography and sport events. These are very high-end cameras. Okay, so there are a lot of cameras. There's film cameras. Film cameras are a little bit more outdated. They actually use the principle of a rotating film, right? Having several pictures moving very fast to create a film. We have instant cameras. Instant cameras actually are cameras that you can immediately take your picture and print them out. Okay, so we're going to leave most of this explanation to later or as an assignment. But then, of course, we all know what a smartphone camera is. So let's take a look at the digital DSLR camera first. Now, the image you are seeing here, or the slide you are seeing, is that of a digital DSLR camera. Again, DSLR means single lens reflex. Okay. Now, these are popular among professional photographers and enthusiasts. They feature interchangeable lenses. Now, this is where DSLR have an advantage. I remember when I was trying to start this photography studio, I literally had to get a DSLR. Actually, I got a DSLR to start a YouTube channel. This YouTube channel you are on right now. Yes, I got a DSLR to start it. I could not afford it because they are quite expensive. And for someone that was still in school, not making money, not doing any work, I was lucky to actually find a relative that had one, and he wasn't really utilizing it. So every now and then I would go and borrow it for like a week and then shoot the videos and return it. Right then, after a while, he discovered that I was disturbing him too much, and he said I should just take the camera and pay a little bit of money. I think it was 20K I gave him or something. So you cannot get a DSLR camera for 20K. That's 20,000 naira. But that was my luck. So why I said that little bit of story is, do not say because you cannot afford these equipments, you will not get started. I think the very first thing you need to do is to start acquiring knowledge, start understanding how to snap with the cameras, understand how the cameras work, so that if you are ever opportune to actually lay your hands on one, you would know how to utilize it. You will not be lost. Okay, so that's what I did. I started watching tutorials about cameras before I ever laid my hands on anyone. So that's just an encouragement to you guys that are starting to remember to just keep learning, right? Irrespective of how much you have to purchase this equipment. And also these days you can actually rent a DSLR camera for as low as 5,000 naira. So if you know how to take good pictures, right? You've learned the theories and all that, you can actually go and rent this camera for 5,000 naira, go to an event, take pictures, make like 30, 40, 50,000 naira that day, and return the camera. All the profit is yours. So you can actually use that, your knowledge, to save towards buying a real camera. So do not joke with the knowledge you are getting, and do not joke with actually doing more research and learning more. Okay. Now, again, I said the features of interchangeable lenses. Now, lenses, this is a whole topic that can take a whole day to discuss because till now I'm still trying to understand all the different lenses and what they do. Okay, we have the Sigma lens, we have the prime lens, we have the kit lens, we have the zoom lens, we have the fixed focus lens, we have the prime lens. I said prime lens already. So they are like, you know, a million different categories of lenses, and that's what make DSLRs powerful. So you can have a cheap DSLR that is relatively cheap. Once you fix it with an expensive lens, it does magic. It's like a whole new camera. So do not joke with lenses. We'll get there. When we get there, we'll talk more about it. Now, DSLRs, they use a mirror, right? And an optical viewfinder for composing shots. What this simply means is at the back of your DSLR camera, which is here at the moment, there is a little screen, but it's actually not a screen. I used to think it was a screen, but it's actually a a viewfinder, an optical viewfinder that is a reflection, you see the way the light is moving, of the original image. So think about it like the camera obscura we saw before, how the image moved through the lens and then it's reflected upwards. The same thing with the viewfinder. So most times you see us photographers close one eye and put our face in the camera. It's not because we like to put our face in the camera. It was created that way, that you composite your shot, you compose your shot, right, by looking through this viewfinder. Okay, so that gives you a direct image of what you are seeing. So this is a mirrored camera. This right here is the mirror, and it flips the inverted image. Remember we said that the image is initially inverted, so this mirror does that. Although more recent cameras do not actually need a, a viewfinder, and that's because they do not have a mirror. So you just have a screen here that displays the image, and that's all. So we'll talk more about this later. But one thing I observed about this viewfinder that I feel like you should take note of is when you have a DSLR camera and you are trying to shoot with a flash, you can only do it with the viewfinder and not with the screen. So for a lot of cameras, your screen becomes useless when you connect an external flash to it. But when we talk about flash photography, we will address that. Okay. Now, DSLR cameras provide excellent image quality. You'll be surprised to know that a lot of DSLR cameras are just 20 megapixel. And why that is amazing is that's actually depending on the sensor size. So we'll talk about sensors in cameras later on. But briefly, what it does is with a sensor, it tells how many information of the picture can be captured. So basically, when you have a very large sensor in the camera, it's going to be more expensive. It's going to have a higher megapixel rating. So there are cameras that can be 30 megapixel, 35 megapixel. I think very few cameras are up to 40 megapixel. And those cameras are going to be in thousands of dollars or millions of naira. So the camera we currently use, which is the Rebel T5i Canon, it's just 18 megapixel, and that's very, very low compared to what other cameras have. So, but why I mentioned that is you may notice that phone photography, they sell you with the idea that you can get 100 megapixel. Like my phone actually says it has an 100 megapixel camera, but that is not true. That is not the actual resolution. That's what you call upscaling. So now, some of this information I'm dropping, they just come to me and I tell you because I may not have remember to write them down in the notes or in the slides. So just realize that when a phone or a mobile phone camera tells you 50 megapixel or even 100 megapixel, like some do, they cannot actually have the sensor that can take that amount of pixels. Okay, we'll talk about pixels and how an image is produced later on. But what they do is that they take the 8 megapixel, 10 megapixel that the sensor produce and upscale it, through AI and other digital means. So that's image upscaling. So, but let's move on to more to more about the DSLR cameras. Okay. All right. So this is a very very brief, um, a little bit detailed anyway, labeling of the front part of the DSLR camera. Now, this camera really can scare a lot of people, and what that means is there are a lot of people that they see this camera and they feel like it's complicated, right? But it's not supposed to be. It's not supposed to be very complicated, because once you understand it, you find that all DSLR cameras have the same or similar buttons. So let's take a look at some of the important buttons. The first one is the shutter button. It's always going to be on the right side. If you look at your hand, take a look at your right hand, right? The finger after your thumb, which is your first index finger, I believe, the one after the thumb, that is your shutter button finger. So once you place your hand around, you're going to place your right hand around the camera and hold it this way. And then that's your first index finger after the thumb is going to be placed on the shutter button. Okay. It's important to know how to hold the camera so you don't, drop it one, and so you actually don't maybe cover the lens or cover something important. So that's the shutter button. And it's also important to note that a lot of times the shutter button have two modes of shutter. Two modes of shutter, which is the half shutter and the full shutter. So a lot of cameras actually allow you to gently tap on the shutter button to perform the autofocus operation. So when you gently tap on the shutter button, it will try to autofocus. And then when you push it in completely, it snaps the picture. So a lot of beginner mistake when you give them a camera is they just immediately start pressing the shutter button. And then you start having blurry pictures that are not in focus. So remember that, not to make that mistake. Press your shutter button very slightly to focus your image, and then press it again to snap. Okay. Now, another important feature you find in most DSLRs is the mode dial. Why this is important is this is where you actually choose the different functions, right? From the manual mode, auto mode, and all the different modes your camera can allow you to use. So we are going to be learning how to use the manual, because when you switch to manual mode, right, you have access to control every single feature of your camera, which is your ISO, your shutter speed, your aperture, your exposure compensation, and everything that involves lighting and even temperature, right, involving the colors. You have that control using the manual mode. So, but when you have autofocus, when you have shutter priority, when you have, sports mode, all those ones actually limit your control. But they are helpful for someone that doesn't have that much experience. Just point and shoot. So that's that for that. Of course, you have a power switch. Now this is variable. Different cameras have their different location for power switch. Now this you may not know yet, but let's talk about it a bit. This is what we call the hot shoe. Okay, the hot shoe is simply a connector that is going to be above your camera. Now, if you do not find this hot shoe on your camera, you did not buy a DSLR camera. You probably bought a point and shoot or a compact camera. Okay, but when you have a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, you will have the option for the hot shoe, and this does multiple functions. You can attach a microphone here. You can attach your flash here. Both your on-camera flash and your off-camera flash can be attached here. So this is important, right? And then there are some connectors here that help synchronize the flash and the trigger of the camera. All right. Now, of course, the camera has a built-in flash. Well, not all cameras do, but you see right here, it's currently collapsed. When you push this button called the flash button, by pushing this button, the built-in flash is going to pop up, and then you're going to be able to use to snap to take pictures. The only problem with the built-in flash is that you have no control. You have no control of the intensity of the flash, and you have no control of the direction. So it's only going to push forward. Professionally, it is not recommended to use your built-in flash. Don't use it. Okay. Professionally, you want to use a flash that you can actually point to different directions, or even better still, an off-camera flash that you can connect with a softbox to take good pictures. Most of the pictures you take with the built-in flash are going to have issues like the red eye effect. They're going to have harsh light, right? Because it's a point source. So they're going to have harsh light with with very, very pronounced shadows directly behind the image. You, those images don't look good. So unless it's the only option you have and it's a very dark place, use your built-in flash. Otherwise, don't use it. Okay. So there's a lot we can spend a long time here. I don't want us to, but let us talk about some important things like the mirror. Now, you are not supposed to actually allow this mirror to be exposed to air, because by exposing it to air, you're exposing it to dust particles, moisture, and whatever stains this mirror. Remember your camera obscura in the history of photography? This is where your image that comes through the lens is going to be focused on. So you do not want these mirrors to be tampered with in any form, or it will appear in your picture. I think the camera we have at the studio currently has an issue with the mirror because it usually produces one kind of spot in the image that is not nice. So uh, just to avoid it, there are some photographers that actually clean this. You can actually get a very clean piece of white material to clean this, but I do not recommend it. If you don't know what you're doing, just remember to cover this lens cap all the time. So there's supposed to be a lens here, right? But right now there is no lens. So there are other things, there are contacts. These are the way electronic signals move from your camera to the lens, because your camera actually controls the lens. You can use your camera to control the autofocus of the lens and whatever. And these contacts actually help make that connection between your camera and the lens. When we talk about lenses and lens mounts, we are going to really talk about how there are different kinds of lens mounts, right? The RF lens, the RO lens, so that you do not find yourself with a camera and the lens that are not compatible, because there are a lot of cameras and lenses that are not compatible. In fact, you cannot get a Nikon lens and put it on a Canon camera body. Most of the time, it's not going to work, right? So there's a lot to talk about here. This is the grip. This is the remote control sensor. This is the mode dial. Some other cameras have your ISO switch here. You have so this is an EF lens mount, right? EF lens. There's EF, there's RF. We'll talk about that later. This button is the lens release button. So if you are trying to force the lens out of the camera, it shows that you don't know what you're doing. There's a button there you can push before you twist the lens counterclockwise to remove it. So if you're ever in a position where you're out with a photographer and it's like, please take this camera and change the lens, this is the button you push before you twist the lens to the left and then put in the new lens. So let's move on from here. There's a lot to talk about when we actually get into looking at the DSLR in details. Let's look at some of the different DSLR brands, right? So I think the names have been tampered with. So it's actually Canon, right? Nikon, Sony, Lumix, Fujifilm. Lumix is actually Panasonic. If you saw the movie we produced recently, um, we used a Sony Alpha 7 camera, but not DSLR. So these are DSLRs. These all have mirrors in them. They all have optical viewfinders, and that's what they are. So let's look at mirrorless cameras quickly. Now, mirrorless cameras are a lot similar to DSLRs, but the only thing is that they do not have a mirror mechanism. That's one thing. And with that, that makes them more compact. So they are usually smaller, they are usually lightweight than DSLRs. My very first experience with a mirrorless camera, I was not impressed because I felt like if you are holding a digital camera or a professional camera, why should it be small in your hands? I expected all cameras to be heavy, bulky, and look expensive. DSLR and mirrorless cameras actually look cheap, and it can be very annoying because they are very expensive. So someone with a DSLR can actually look like they are more serious than you because they have all the big body, the big lens, it's heavy. But when you hold a mirrorless camera, it looks very embarrassing. I don't know. I would like to have a mirrorless camera that is a little bit bulky in my hands. It feels better to me. So yeah, if you look at the mechanism, it's a lot simpler. You just have light straight to the LCD monitor. The electronic viewfinder is optional. In the case of a mirrorless camera, this has nothing to do with the reflected light. It's actually a copy of the information on the screen, but so that you can view it here, just to keep the tradition. But a lot of DSLR cameras, they lose this viewfinder and just give you the image. I think they should keep the viewfinder because again, it makes you feel like you're actually using a professional camera. So you have the image sensor. This is actually what makes it expensive, right? The bigger the sensor, the more information, the more megapixel and all that. But then the DSLR cameras also have interchangeable lenses, which is awesome. So with interchangeable lenses, you can have very expensive, very bulky lens, and it changes the entire feel and aesthetic of your image. Um, I find that when you put a very big interchangeable lens on a small DSLR camera, it looks very awkward. Looks very, very awkward. Okay. Um, Sorry about that. I think I need to quickly. All right. So we'll be okay. Sorry about that. So we'll be rounding up this section of the lesson pretty soon. Again, this is a mirrorless camera, very similar to the DSLRs, but have a lot less technicalities going on, right? So they're lighter, they're more expensive, and they actually produce better image quality. They also are very good for videos. Yes, they make very nice videos, 4K, 8K, as the case may be. So let's look at some of the parts of a mirrorless camera. A mirrorless camera has, just like in that of a mirrorless, you have the ISO button, you have the exposure compensation button. A lot of them have a dedicated movie record button because I said they are very good for videos, and they have the mode dial. So when you have a very professional camera, you should be able to switch to manual mode and so on. They have their screen. It could be a fixed screen or a tilt screen. Of course, most people prefer a tilt screen so that whatever angle you are taking pictures with, you can tilt it. The hot shoe, again, like that of a flash, like that of the DSLR, where you can mount your flash or your flash trigger or even a microphone as the case may be, and the card slot, and then the lens mount and so on. Okay, so let's move on to the next. All right, let's see some of the top mirrorless camera brands. Again, it's the same brands, the same set of camera producers. They all just transition to mirrorless. So if you actually try to go and get a DSLR camera, you may find out that they are no longer in production. You may end up buying, 2014, 2015 model, or maybe 2020. But from 2022, 2021, all recent cameras are most likely going to be mirrorless. Again, because they are smaller, they are compact, they produce better image quality, much better video quality, and also they do not overheat as much because they are not trying to like get a lot of light in. So all around they are better, right? Again, my only beef with mirrorless cameras is the fact that they are small. This Sony A7 Mark II is what we used to shoot the movie Zera, and it was surprisingly good compared to a Blackmagic. If you notice, we did not bring in the Blackmagic camera here, which I think we should have, but a Blackmagic camera is a video camera, not a photography camera. So that's why it's not included in this list. So if you are wondering where is the Blackmagic Cinemas 4K, Cinema 6K, why is it not on the list? Blackmagic is good for videos, movie making, and so on, but not for photography. I don't know why. I guess it's just their area of specialization. So yes, let's move on. Now, I want us to stop here. I want us um, to go back home and look at the different types of cameras, the point and shoot camera, the compact cameras, the action cameras, the film cameras. Just do your research on them. If possible, get pictures, put them together in a Word document like you did the last time. In fact, you can add them to the Word document from the last assignment so that we have everything in one document. So research on these cameras and tell me what you like about them. I personally think the Insta cameras are nice because you can snap them and immediately print out your pictures. And of course, smartphone cameras are awesome because you can decide to go live on Instagram, you can decide to take a picture and post it. The world is getting smarter. So again, we were not able to cover all that we said we would cover, but it was intentional. In the next class, we will move on to some key concepts of a camera. So this is where we're going to talk about camera exposure, talk about the ISO, camera sensitivity to light. Okay, we'll talk about the lenses. We just briefly talk about what you need to know before you start using the camera, and then we'll move on to the basic controls of a camera. So there we'll actually talk about how to control all your manual focus and all your manual mode settings. Okay, so we'll show you how to control the lens, get the lens in focus. If it's a zoom lens, how to zoom in and out of the zoom lens. We'll talk about the aperture, the shutter speed, and the ISO, which is what we call the exposure triangle. So we'll talk about exposure triangle and all that before we move into the next section. All right, thank you very much. If you enjoyed this lesson, and by the way, I the course is still ongoing. So if you are getting value from what we are teaching, tell your friends about it, right? I think we need more people watching this. Tell your friends about it. Get more people to join the course. It's free, so there's no reason why we should be small in number. So tell your friends about this course. Share the videos, share the links, and let us get more people watching this. Thank you very much for your time, and until next time, have a wonderful one.